So delighted to welcome you all to this workshop, and I would like to start by extending a really warm and heartfelt thank you to everybody here at the Blavatnik School of Government at the University of Oxford for organising the first What Works on the Education Annual Conference, which I hope we will all agree was really successful. We have another 2 half days today for some of us, and it's been great over the last couple of days. And I think the leadership, the expertise, the blend of voices we've had here have been really instrumental in bringing us all together to discuss and look at the way forward, which is it's coming into focus. I also want to thank each of our strategic partners for your participation today and also in the initiative more broadly. It is a complicated initiative. I've stopped calling it a programme because it's really much bigger than that. It's more sophisticated, it's more nuanced, and it's more ambitious. But your commitment, obviously, to the educational outcomes that we are trying to achieve globally, particularly, I'm going to say, because I'm from FCDO for girls and all those marginalised children, is absolutely the engine behind our collective success. Whether it's through research or policy development or on-the-ground implementation, through that all-important science of implementation, your contributions are really helping us to shape these evidence-based solutions that we hope will transform systems and lives. I think the hub has gradually been coming into focus over the recent years. When I first learned about it, it was as if somebody had sort of turned the fuzziness dial on the screen, because I couldn't quite get the whole of the hub onto my screen. I knew there were other bits out there in the solar system, probably ecosystem in your language, and I couldn't quite see how it was all going to fit together, which is why I'm very interested in this idea of the pipes. Where do they meet? Where do they miss one another? Where are the holes? But I think we're fixing them. I hope we are. And I think it's been very compelling this week to see how much it is coming into sharper focus. We're on a journey. There will be bumps along the way. There will probably be disagreements. We have a lot of people we need to work with and play nicely with, and that's always going to be a challenge. But I'm absolutely sure, having been here for the last couple of days, that we have all the right people involved. And it's also obviously been fantastic to reach the point where we have our first annual conference. And I was reflecting this morning over what we've heard about over the last couple of days. So small-scale pilots, larger-scale research on TARN, on structured pedagogy, teacher training, their incentives, why they move, what the head teachers do to help them, interventions with government officials and that whole ecosystem around evidence for the system, for data, for evidence-based decision-making. We've considered the merits of RCT, A/B testing, and the all-important, as I've said before, challenge of up-to implementation science and creating the right acceptance and welcoming of evidence-based solutions. I've also heard from my angle 3 important priorities that we're going to be taking back and talking about more in FCDO. The need for a laser focus on inclusion around gender, around children with disabilities, around the lowest quintile of vulnerable children in a range of contexts, and they look different wherever we go. And there is that multidimensional aspect of poverty and exclusion and vulnerability, which we need to be looking at for where our evidence making goes and where the decision making comes from. As you'd expect me to say, the need for more evidence on cost-effective interventions in a range of contexts, using different instruments, different partners to inform those who actually hold the purse strings. How do we convince them of how we reach those most vulnerable, how we reach the less vulnerable, where the systems are already better, and what the different unit costs, if I have to be that clinical, are. And it is never just about the lowest number. We all know this, but we need the evidence to convince others. And then also the need for the evidence to respond to governments and funders' needs. And those can be quite different, but governments are funders, and we should remember that, and the quantum of finance they are providing into their own education system. That also means, as we heard from multiple presenters this week, looking at the needs of the children, teachers, parents, and communities, and not just from what our status quo systems in governments or wherever it may be tell us is the right way forward. And this requires a carefully planned pipeline of policy priorities with a really clear-eyed focus through to implementation. We can't start from the point of getting to the end game and saying, right, we've done this bit of policy, evidence research, and then thinking we should really have integrated these sets of metrics or this parallel piece of work at the same time, because we can't go back in time. And we need to be constantly thinking, where is the next challenge coming from? What do people need from the hub? It should be a model that endures. As I've said, I no longer see it as a project where you stop, pack up and move on. It's got to deliver long-term transformational change. And I think that is what is so exciting about it. It is much bigger, even I think, than we had originally envisaged. And our ambition should remain extremely high for what it can deliver. So huge congratulations and thanks again to the BSG or BFG teams, I tend to end up calling it, for your leadership in designing and organising this conference. It's been fantastic, including the Hub Community of Practice Day on the Tuesday. And thank you also to all the strategic partners and the consortium partners who have contributed so much. A final reflection, if the Hub is going to deliver on its potential and ambition, we need partnerships, collaboration, the ability to listen, recognise where we have differences of opinion, challenge, and find that common ground. We are going to need to keep converging, not becoming homogenous and therefore vanilla, but thinking about how we move forward and don't get waylaid by details that don't allow us to move forward. That is a risk with the number of partners and with the complexity of the architecture of the hub. And we're going to need to give opportunities to the multiple voices and expertise, skills, angles that people come from in order to drive it forward collectively. There are so many sharp brains in this building and so many passionate advocates for what we're trying to achieve. We need to be able to listen, challenge, find common ground and move forward. So very excited to hear more from you today. It's an invaluable opportunity today for us to reflect on the progress we've made so far, where we're going. And I'm going to hand over to our director, Noam Andres. Noam, the floor is yours.
So Judith said it all, so I won't say too much more. I'll just also highlight that we have two colleagues, or a couple of colleagues joining online from civil society who will also give us some remarks at some point throughout the day. So most of us are in the room, but a couple of colleagues tuning in. So thank you so much, Judith, for those inspiring opening remarks. And I'm still abuzz with the conference the last couple of days, but we love feedback and we've been already getting some feedback already and we would love more. But two things that have struck me. One is people have seemed to like the balance of continuity. We wanted to build on so many of the people's efforts in this room, on RISE. So much have been done and we want to carry that forward, but also a freshness and an energy and a bit of an additional push and momentum. So I've been hearing that mix seems to be resonating and I hope it does with everyone in this room. So that was great feedback. And the other was that it does seem that an agenda is being set. And so I think to Judith's point of kind of coming into focus, I was hearing that the focus is focusing. Maybe it's not perfectly focused just yet. Maybe today we'll get even more focused, but it is coming into focus and it feels like an agenda is being set. And now maybe is the time actually to think about what are the priorities. So if we had to pick just a few things in this really ambitious agenda, what would they be? And so I want to have this analogy of a big kind of tanker ship, if you can envision that in your mind, a big ship. And that's a very hard thing to move. And you might be tempted to try to just kind of move the whole ship. But that's not actually how ships change direction. As we know, it's a rudder. It's actually a very small piece of the ship that moves just a little bit. And then the ship starts to go in a different direction over time. So my challenge and my ask to the people in this room today as we dig in and deep dive is what is the rudder move, which actually looks a little bit subtle, a little bit humble, but can send us in an exciting direction because it is a tanker. This is a big ship with lots of partners and a decentralized consortium. And so thinking about those key small moves that can actually send us towards the future that we're all so excited about. And then the last thing I'll say is one of the other really exciting things about today, and a lot of folks in the room are a term we've been using as strategic partners, is there is both a high level commitment among really influential institutions, but also very tangible and specific things that the partners are doing. So I'm really excited to hear from all of the strategic partners today and their both specific initiatives, as well as how it comes together as a whole and kind of drives the whole ecosystem and the tanker ship. So thank you, everyone. Welcome, welcome, and looking forward to digging in.
Okay, so we're going to hear now from everybody, all the different strategic partners. Welcome again to people. And we thought just before we do that, as a learning organisation, we try to be, as SDO, and I know at BSG as well, one of our principles of the hub is learning from the past and building on what's already there. So we have a special guest who's, I'm going to say 2 minutes from RISE, from the intellectual leadership team from RISE, to say how this is also building on that fantastic initiative that we also were all behind. So may I just welcome Barbara, and she's only got 3 minutes, so. That's fine. Thank you, Rachel.
Stay here?
No, please come to the front.
I'm not a funder or a fundee, but sort of an interloper here, but was very passionate about RISE, which I felt was truly powerful force for improving global education. And I was, wanted to see what the WhatWorks Hub was going to be in relation to RISE. And the power, think about what power is. It's the combination of resources with strategic vision. And when RISE was launched with that lady's strategic vision of having long-term support for deep systems of research and unifying funders and communities of academics and policymakers around that vision. And the same thing is true now for the hub. The stronger the work, the stronger the force will be, and the stronger the transformative power will be, is if we get more and more academics and country teams and people from across the world engaged in this serious vision, and more funders pooling their resources. I was way back when, like over 20 years ago, I was one of the designers of the EFA Fast Track Initiative. I don't know if there's any people, the old timers here, but the guiding principle of that was to try to think from the country's perspective how important it was to have donor external support resources coordinated and coming together and being driven by countries' own priorities and strategies. And so that, I think, part of that is part of the vision now for the hub, that we will find ways for, instead of having a zillion different projects here and there, we'll find a way to make these all coherent. And my particular personal hope is that we'll find ways to leverage the knowledge from the experiences across all these diverse countries and experiences by having some common instruments to generate some common data about them. Anyway, so I can't just say enough about Rachel's vision and the ability to get people mobilized around it and to extract money to support it. And hopefully with Noam, that's going to continue and be redoubled. Thank you.
Thanks. So all 3 minutes pitches. So I think it's Maria first. Please.
Thank you. Excited to be here. When I came first into the room, everything was set in classroom style. And I'm like, oh gosh, it feels really like being back at school. But I'm glad that the tables are not square. So Maria Brendelmeyer, I'm leading the Secretariat for Building Evidence in Education, or B Square, which is a group of 40 funders or of education research. So multilateral organizations, so we include them in the funders group, bilateral funders and foundations. And the focus of our group is to foster kind of different research activities. So when we started, which was in 2012, we set out 3 goals. So one was to increase the quality of education research. The other one was to promote the use of evidence in education programming. And the third one was to strengthen donor research collaboration. And so we have been working on all of these. We have developed a bunch of different guidance notes, etc. And we just had a really good steering committee meeting, and the steering committee members are the World Bank, USAID, FCDO, Jacobs Foundation, and a UN representative, and the UN seat rotates. And so we just had a discussion and decided that really what we want to focus on over the next few years is on the things that we as a group of members can directly influence. So we have developed, for example, different guidance notes, but the idea is that we want to focus on the things that we will actually apply ourselves in our own organizations. So for example, the cost guidance note, the implementation research guidance note. And so really holding ourselves accountable also to making the change. And, it's the biggest research funders in the world. So if we are able to make a change with those organizations, it will really have an impact. And so what we are looking forward to working with the What Works Hub is helping to develop the guidance notes in a more user-friendly way. So kind of really, the cost guidance note may perhaps be too complicated, and that's perhaps why not everybody uses it. So what can we develop? And that Simon and I have already talked a little bit about that. For example, on cost guidance, develop something that we are really going to use so that it does make a difference. And then the other thing is also we're interested, in uptake, especially our members are always interested, obviously, in uptake. So what can we learn also from the What Works Hub in terms of evidence uptake and what you're doing and feeding them that back also to our members. Also offering, we have special interest groups on specific topics. So that's, for example, on education in emergencies, on early childhood development, on teacher professional development, on climate education, on, anyway, so we are offering also that as potential sounding boards and for peer consultations for things that the hub develops. So we hope that over the next few years, with the What Works Hub, we will see that the guidance notes that we are jointly developing or that exist already will be also leveraged in the activities of the What Works Hub and are useful to the What Works Hub. And that we develop some other things together. I'm sure that over the years we'll develop new ideas of how we can collaborate. And so we are very open to making that impact within the research and with the research community, and so hopefully reflecting that in the output. So with that, I'm changing hats.
This way,
So-
getting another 3 minutes.
Because so I'm also leading the secretariat for the GEEP, for the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel, which is a group of 13 renowned researchers that is an independent panel. It's funded by several organizations from here. So the convening organizations are in USAID, FCDO, UNICEF, and the World Bank.
That's small. A small institution.
And so, so that group has a different focus. It's preparing the Smart Bias report, which I think has been mentioned several times over the last few days. And so that group is actually creating the synthesized and curated evidence product with a focus on policymakers. So it's a short, relatively short product that focuses on specific types of evidence. We would call it kind of the rigorous evidence, and there are definitely some things that can be criticized about not what's not included, etc. But I think it has gained really a lot of visibility. And so what we are looking forward to working with the What Works Hub is that Noam is already on the secretariat for that group, and so we are really looking forward to working with him in that capacity. We're also hoping that the GEEP report can be a useful guide for some of the research that the What Works Hub is carrying out. And then we have started, even with the pilot project of the What Works Hub, to work on dissemination. And so the dissemination of the Smart Bias report is both at a global level through global conferences or webinars, but most importantly, directly by working with governments. And so we worked in Kenya with the team that developed a Kenya conference with the government. And so we look forward to doing more of that in the future with the What Works Hub. And what we have found is that, it's, as you all know, it's not one contact point that makes a difference in terms of the uptake of the evidence. And so we really look forward to broadening some of those contact points so that the governments will be kind of more receptive to some of the evidence, global and local, obviously. So our focus has been more on the global part of that. So in a few years, we're hoping that the local education policies will be influenced by the findings from the Smart Bias reports, and that the promising bias hopefully will have developed either into bad bias or great bias, so that we know, is it more than just promising? So getting more of that evidence going. And then also that we can leverage more of the locally produced evidence. So at the moment, we know a lot of the things in the Smart Bias report are globally produced or globally led. So we are really looking forward to more of that. And with that, I think we're really looking forward from both groups to working very closely with the What Works Hub. I think there's great potential, and thank you.
We need to move on to the next one, but I just want to also add, so the idea of the GEEP is actually quite unique in the evidence space, that so many things coming together. And so, definitely as the hub, we want to keep on working closely. I mean, there's endless evidence initiatives these days, but it's great to have such a network and a coordinating mechanism around it. So we'll definitely keep on investing in that. I think it's Gates. Here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I'm not quite sure what my concept of 3 minutes is becoming, but I'm going to try to. It's a hard thing for me too. So anyway, I will give you notice when we can take this.
I was just going to say that for me to work out 3 minutes, I'm going to have to work out the maths and say whatever the time is on that time, I'm going to have to add 3. So when does my 3 minutes start? Now. Okay, I'm Ashley Cassidy. I'm the policy lead for global education in the Gates Foundation. And my past, you understand behind it because I'm just my past actions have been, I was one of Her Majesty's inspectors in Ofsted. And so there we are very, very direct, and we have to speak in a language that parents can understand. This is connected to what I'm going to say. My first point is to improve learning outcomes, which is part of the very important goal of the What Works Hub. We have to improve teaching. So what does it take to improve teaching? We have the words, and GEEP report talked about this as well, structured pedagogy and teaching at the right level. What other level are you going to teach at if it's not at the right level? So what is the interaction between structured pedagogy and teaching at the right level? What does a good textbook look like? What comprises of teaching literacy textbook that's effective and a numeracy textbook that's effective? What are the practices that highly effective teachers do, and what are the systems to allow that to happen? We don't in the global ed sector get into that detail, and we need to if we're going to shift things. We know formative assessment is not done well in many education systems, not just LMICs, but also in HICs. So what kind of things support teachers to make better use of assessment information? I've always, half of my career was in the UK education systems. I'm always struck with by the difference between the discourse in high-income countries on education and the discourse in low-income countries. The gap is too wide, and What Works Hub's got an important role in bridging that. My second point is about research that is rooted in government systems, that responds to their priorities, that really looks at the program that is already running and asks, how can we make that impact more impactful? If that's good English, not. So think about, I lead on the work in India. We've just done midline evaluations being done. The kind of detail that has come through is that teachers are good at doing the I do side of the lesson, they're good at the we do side, but not enough time has been spent on that you do side. That is really important information, because then you can go back in the system and say, how do we make that you do happen? Children are not doing independent practice, that learning is not going into their long-term memory, and therefore they're not building upon it. Things like the language you use. I just looked at the abstract of a What Works Hub paper, and I went, what language is this? It was English, but not as I know it. You cannot communicate, even in your abstract, what the big point is, why would I read the main paper? But there's also an important point about taking that very economisty, and I'm not looking at that with a smile on my face, but combining it with what would land with teachers. And before you say our teachers are not going to even look at that research, that's on us. How do we make teachers look at the research? How do we make educators look at the research? How do we make comms people look at that research? In my last 25 seconds, the final point I want to make is research led by the Global South. Look around this room right now. It is not representative of the communities that where we work. And it's not enough to say that the quality of research needs more support. It is on us to put systems in place so that it is more representative, that we are there, we're holding the conference there, but they are the ones whose names are on the paper and are doing the research. It's brilliant to be here. It's brilliant to be having this connection made. And I'm just Thank you very much.
I don't give high punishments for criticizing economists, but okay. Next one is going to be British Council, I think. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Conley, and I'm Director of English and School Education at the British Council. I am by background a teacher and a teacher educator, and that's where my heart lies. I have got 3 minutes. I'm a loquacious Irishman, so that's going to be quite a challenge. So I plan to speak for 1.5 minutes, knowing that I might go off on a tangent, which I've already started to do. So what does success look like for the British Council? Oh, classes, I'm getting old as well. So What Works Hub for Global Education, it's a very complex partnership. Many partners, as others have said today, moving towards the same goal through individual and collective action. A successful partnership is not guaranteed, as we discussed. This is a tanker. So the British Council role is to smooth the partnership journey. I suppose we might be the navigator on that tanker, maybe not the navigator, but we're certainly helping guide that along. So success at a program level is a vibrant, collaborative, and open set of partnerships, making a positive impact on evidence-informed policymaking. So what are our ambitions at a country and a global level? Well, the British Council is an organisation founded on building trust. And we work in more than 100 countries around the world with trusted partnerships with multiple stakeholders. So those stakeholders include governments, education institutions, organizations, teachers, school leaders, parents, and students. So we intend on leveraging that trust our credibility in the education space in those countries, our depth of experience in developing and steering successful partnerships and programs to bring the right people together, right time for contextually relevant conversations within the local ecosystem. So in 5 years, we will have mobilized active, collaborative national ecosystems that contain diverse voices, with local voices taking the lead. So a colleague of mine at the Education World Forum, I tried to think of something better, but I couldn't. He said this is based on the 3 C's, essential for our collective success. That is communication, collaboration, and coalition. Thank you very much.
It was only 2.5 minutes, well done.
Prize winner so far.
Tonica.
I might, okay, Right. Hello, everyone. We've spent a lot of time together this week, so I feel like we're now a family now. 5 days and spend more time with you all than with my partner. BuzzFeed days. So, okay, so I wanted to just recap a little bit. Many of you know what the foundation does, but I thought I would summarize it in 2 ways. One is the global level. And there we've been a funder for many years now, 30 years, I think, of frontier research and how children learn. So the foundation has been, is known for that. So we do a lot of stuff that actually has absolutely nothing to do with what we heard about the last few days. It's about neuroscience, behavioral, genetics. We have fellows in our midst that study black holes and how that relates to how the brain functions. So it's like really frontier stuff. We do ask them sometimes, okay, tell me how that's going to land into the Ed Lab's work at some point. Very interesting conversations. But we do that. We do that, and we are just starting to work on something called Blavatnik that some of you may have heard about. So we're attempting to kind of build the first global cross-cultural, multidisciplinary, it's quite complicated, open data set aiming to capture the richness of the human experience. So what this means is that we're looking to collect data on a core set of measures across different sites around the world so that we can build the data set of how children learn throughout time and contexts. And this would be an open data set that all researchers around the world will be able to use. So we're really excited about that because that is the piping that we need, that all of you and the researchers out there, including in the Global South, we hope, are able to tap into so that we can learn about the variability of the human experience and how children learn. So that's one. At the country level, what we want to do is, you've heard a lot about the Ed Labs that we're supporting. So we'll be building those in the 4 contexts where we work: Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Colombia, and Switzerland. And we're building co-funding mechanisms that are the engines of growth and funding for those Ed Labs. And we're working with the World Bank, with GP, and with the government to do so. Last 40 seconds. I want to leave you with 3 questions that we're asking ourselves that we will not be able to answer alone. And those are, how can we create systems for large numbers of kids that take account of human variability? That's a big question we have. How do we cater to the variability in how children learn at scale? It's a massive challenge. Secondly, how do we support a culture of evidence in systems? And what are the characteristics of learning, of a culture of learning, and how do they vary across contexts? How do you build systems in high income or low income contexts that actually interrogate themselves all the time? And then finally, how do we best codify, that goes back to Asia's point, what works in the classroom, but also create the science of how to spread that? And that is a missing piece. That's it.
Great.
I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, we have Amy for LGI.
Hi everyone, great to see you all again this morning. So my name is Amy Bellinger. I'm Director of the Learning Generation Initiative. And I just wanted to explain today how we would like to contribute to the success of the What Work Club. So firstly, we think our role in that collaboration is to drive political engagement and collaboration so that research gets translated into action at country, regional and global levels. So our vision for success is, through our actions, we will be able to enable and influence governments and the global education community to take more evidence-based actions around the education workforce and system delivery, which are two of our main focus areas, and that will help accelerate foundational learning for scale. So for Pillar 1, we will have produced and disseminated research syntheses on critical education workforce and system delivery enablers, working with researchers from the Global South, ensuring a gender and inclusion lens, and harnessing our champions to ensure research uptake. For Pillar 2, we will work with our champions and with governments in Ghana, Kenya, Pakistan, and Tanzania, and the Ed Labs and all of you to support the government foundational reform priorities through high-level engagement, policy dialogue, regular mentoring of an LGI champion to the key reform lead in the country, and on-demand research-led support so that we can really shift on a particular topic. So, for example, in Kenya, we'd really like to work closely with the Ed Labs and the Ministry of Education to create the culture and practice for data-driven decision-making, but at the subnational level. And we'd like to make sure our workforce and system delivery expertise can influence the foundational learning strategy. We will also be working closely with ADEA because we think that's a really important platform for research uptake. Through that, we will collaborate with them on the triennial. We will facilitate an African policymaker forum, and we will ensure that we can have the opportunity to influence more of the high-level African bodies that are so important for taking this work forward. And finally, for Pillar 3, through new research on learning teams, where we will harness a lab testing approach. And this week has been so helpful for me to understand how we can do that now. We'll shed light on how systems can harness intentional collaboration amongst the workforce, parents and community to improve foundational learning and the well-being of the most marginalised children. Finally, through our localisation-focused approach, we'll support regional and national partners to take the lead. And by working collaboratively and flexibly with all of you, we hope that our actions complement the What Works Hub ambitions and lead to greater reach and impact.
Lots of things to think about as well. And I will say, look, I think one day I'm going to need to dream about that noise of the clock, you know. Yeah. Maybe have it on my desk all the time. Sense of urgency, that's great. That's brilliant. UNESCO, thank you. What is?
Thank you. Good morning, I'm Martin Benavides from IIP UNESCO, the International Institute for Educational Planning. Very happy to be here with you. I would like to begin by defining what IIP is. Probably some of you don't know exactly our mandate, and our mandate is very clear and complex. It's to help countries to better plan and manage the educational sector. The history of the institute has been more related to plans. You know, as you know, there's a whole history of the institutions. But now we have the challenge to move more to the management component of our mandate. And that's why this hub is very important for us, because I think that in this move that we want to do, implementation is critical, because the question of how to link plans and management of those plans is a question of implementation. That's why I think we fit very well on this initiative. So at the end, our ambition and also our challenge, because this is a challenge, we have to innovate, is how to link plans or how to move plans to the classrooms. That's the challenge we have every day that I'm trying to solve with my colleagues. Suguru Mizunoya is here also from the IEP. But it's our commitment also with the situations that all the member states that we have been helping, last year 58 countries are facing right now. right now, they need to get help for transforming the day-to-day operation at a classroom level. And that's the challenge that we are now assuming at the institute. And key components of that challenge are data and capacities. And our work here at the World Hub will be related to these two components. In the case of data, we are going to be helping one country to improve the way they coordinate internally, how they integrate data. This is a context where data exists, but is not very well coordinated. Learning assessment data in particular, but also it's a question of capacities, because we need to improve the capacities, especially at the middle tier, because most of the implementation is related to how well countries are implementing subnational level of the different contexts that they are facing. So we are going to be working, improving the understanding, the bottlenecks of the middle tiers and as a way of improving the implementation of the different policies that we are trying to help countries to improve.
Thank you. UNICEF?
Morning, everybody. I'm Linda Jones. I lead the education unit at Innocenti, our Global Office for Research and Foresight. So for our ambition, being a strategic partner with the What Works Hub and the work going forward, success from the UNICEF perspective with regards to this is that we see embedding research into education programs at scale, foundational learning programs at scale, is a common approach. And it's a demand. It's demanded by governments and community alike. You're doing a thing with my child's education. How will I know that this is working? And that, as we've discussed over the past couple of days, learning is always happening. The governments, parents, caregivers have a very clear, continuous understanding on how their children are doing with regards to their reading, their numeracy, and their social emotional learning across low-income countries. And particularly at the global level, when we look to the future, the 6-year horizon, the 6-7-year horizon, that we have far more evidence and research tailored for children with disabilities on their foundational learning, integrated into mainstream systems, for refugees, the same, for early learning, and particularly better support for system strengthening in fragile states. Thank you.
Excellent. A new record for conciseness, thank you. So USAID.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Pagel from USAID Center for Education. So for us, success in 5 years would look like this, that the What Works Hub is a global hub that all strategic partners feel ownership over. And so because we all feel ownership over it, we're contributing to it, we're sustaining it, and we're pointing others to it. So from our USAID perspective, we have a few activities that are really complementary to the What Works Hub. For pillars 1 and 2, we have our Decode activity. For pillar 3, we have our Share activity. And Decode was designed to complement the What Works Hub. So from our perspective, the success would be that we are all able to work together to create something that's not just useful for USAID partners, not just useful for FCDO partners, not just useful for Jacobs partners, for all of the strategic partners in the room, but for anyone invested in education evidence. And so again, specifically for Decode, that would look like us being able to coordinate and collaborate and complement and be complemented by the work of the What Works Hub. And it's a critical moment for all of us, I think, and also for Decode, that we have just completed a work plan. We have things on it like a network resource hub, strengthening our cost work, a call for proposals to strengthen the synthesis and dissemination of evidence at the country level. So we can do this on our own and it will die in 5 years when Decode closes. Or we can do it together. We can put it on the What Works Hub. We can shape it with us and we can have it be something that is useful beyond the life of either of these two projects and beyond anybody, beyond only the people in this room. There's a very real risk, though, that we don't achieve this vision together, because as Judith said really eloquently this morning, it requires careful coordination, willingness to share and shape together what we're doing. But we really do feel like this is an extraordinary opportunity with the expansive partner base that What Works Hub has, with the engagement of all the strategic partners in this room, and with the Partners Board guiding to achieve greater connectedness across actors at the global, regional, and local levels, improved access to evidence at these levels, and improved quality evidence, even given the complexity and maybe messiness of the world in which we all live. Because we're fond of quoting American philosophers this week, I will add my own from Yogi Berra. He said, if the world were perfect, it wouldn't be. And that's where we are, but we really believe at USAID that this is the moment for us to make a big change together. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it sounds like an amazing opportunity for us to also work with AID on the Decode thing. So thank you. And I suppose it's all about, like, everything here is not about whether, but how we do this, and that's will be the great thing. So apparently there's the World Bank as well. We won't forget you.
Thank you. I'm the last one in your organizational speed dating. A lot has been said, so I'll be quite brief. I think sort of how would we define success? In a very, very narrow sense, it would be around the work that we are embarking together in Ghana, in Rwanda, in Nigeria, for it to sort of make a difference, to understand sort of what's happening, how do we push these programs forward, how do we understand the mechanics of how foundational learning programs sort of work out, and how sort of we can make them more effective, and at the end of the day deliver results on these three countries. If we pull out a little bit further, we're hoping that this will be an opportunity to create global public goods, to understand sort of the channels and the mechanisms by which programs are worked out, the kinds of roadblocks that they face, and ultimately the types of solutions that we can come up with to overcome them. And then if we pull back a little bit further, it's really to look at sort of the true science of implementation. Implementation in educational programming has not received a lot of attention. There hasn't been sort of a strong focus of the research literature, and so being able to, again, to sort of bring that into a focus and to sort of inspire a new sort of generation of researchers and leaders to really think through as to how to deliver services, educational services, in an effective way. Will, I think, continue to sort of feed and nurture our work, and ultimately realize the promise of what we've been looking for, is how to ensure that all kids have an access to high quality education. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I've worked decades with the World Bank, but so much doesn't depend on just the formal structures, but the informal leadership of people in fields, and I think you're quite remarkable. So thank you. So, are you joining me? Or you're taking over?
Oh,
Oh no, you're always in control, so it's fine. Right, we have on the program a slightly undefined 35 minutes before you have coffee. So let's use it well.
Great. So we have one visual for you, and then we are opening it up for discussion. So, visual.
Might take a while to get up, so maybe we'll start the discussion.
All right, so maybe we could take a question before we get to the visual.
Oh, I see. So I need to fill in time. Is that right? So let's have a question. Anyone wants to react to anything they heard, anything that they felt they should have been said, or maybe was underestimated or underemphasized, I should have said? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Lucy from SR, Education Sub-Saharan Africa. And I wanted to put a fact out there. In Kenya, class sizes in universities for education, this is teacher training classes, are double every other subject within those universities. That means teachers are not being trained well, and it means that academics in those universities have no time to do research. So one of the things that ESSA would love to do is to work with the Hub to think about how we strengthen the academic community in the countries where you're working, so that locally led research can be part of what creates effective learning in the future.
Can we just ask, did everyone hear the presentation? Because I think it's really ESSA and the role ESSA plays for this partnership is really crucial. I want to see, was everyone at the presentation about ESSA's work? Because you might want to have, no. So maybe, can we give you 3 minutes?
Okay.
Yeah, okay, 3 minutes.
2.5.
2.5.
Two
Okay,
and a
good.
half.
2.5.
Oh, goodness, right. Let's see how I do. Got quite a scratchy voice as well. And now there's a beautiful diagram to compete with. But ESSA, we're all about improving use of evidence and data from Africa. We're very excited about the What Works Hub because we're all about actionable research and evidence. But as you can imagine from what I just said, our roots are really in universities and working with academics and supporting researchers from the global south, specifically from Africa. Over the last few years, I don't know if you saw Daniel's presentation yesterday, we've been doing a lot of work to raise the profile of researchers in Africa and to understand the landscape of research in Africa and to know what those researchers want and need in order to produce more high quality, high impact research. Much of that work has been done in partnership with the Real Centre at the University of Cambridge, and we've been delighted to be supported by people in this room, including Jacobs Foundation and the Gates Foundation. And we're at this really exciting stage where we are now moving from that deep understanding to more direct support to researchers in Africa, and in the coming year, supported by Gates Foundation, amongst others, we will be providing small grants to researchers, seed grants, to help them find the time to develop research ideas, do early research projects. We will be providing more access to professional development opportunities and training. And we will also be supporting researchers to work with practitioners, to work with policymakers, to develop locally led research agendas, so that we are hearing from the countries where we want to see change what they believe is the research that is going to help improve learning for young people. And this is all part of what we want to do, disrupt the current dynamic where knowledge is being produced in the global north. I always say knowledge is power. If we want power to shift the global south, we have to shift knowledge as well. And we'd love to work with the What Works Hub to be part of that.
Very good. I want to comment as well is that, so I direct a center here that studies Africa, and for 30 years we've been trying to think about ways of strengthening economics research on the continent. There's been 30 years of experience of what doesn't work. Lots of small research grants locally doesn't work. We can't really get it. And if there's other people in the room, on the economics we're moving forward, on the education, I would be very interested if any other people want to actually start thinking of it. We did recently some work from across Africa, 30 young researchers, faculty, because we want to encourage, of course, smart people to go back to Africa. How can we support them in the early stages of their careers to actually produce it? And so we're working on systems and can actually emphasize an awful lot of the ones that go back are actually female academics. the males, they get the opportunities and they can stay around and they can take the postdocs here. The females go back, and it's actually a lot to do with female researchers in these countries. How do we support their career development further and to doing it? So anyone here in the room, informally, me as part of the hub, would be very happy to take this forward.
While Lucy was speaking, I just wrote down, can we connect on what it means for researchers to do research in mathematics and numeracy effectively? So let's maybe put our heads together and say, when there is a focus for a research agenda, then it gets used and a demand is created. So if we work on the supply side and the demand side.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that actually specifically in Senegal, there's actually already a very strong understanding within the research community that numeracy is understudied.
Let's connect on that.
Yes. I think, in the spirit of letting people speak that haven't been able to speak and present. I mean, IPA is also a partner that works a lot with it. So maybe you should tell us a little bit, maybe. Would you like to have your couple of minutes?
Sure. I'm going to present in the next session, but I was reflecting on your question, and something that we have been confronting when it comes to generating these structures within the government that link out to the ecosystem researchers is that we end up with a lot of international researchers partnering up with our labs, and we want to encourage local researchers to be engaging with our labs as well. One of the challenges they have is that international researchers are paid to do research, whether local researchers are not. So when it comes to engaging with the government can provide the data and the question, the researcher can work with the government with the question, but then we don't find the resources to cover the time for those researchers. Assuming that the researcher already have the capacity, the training to do the type of research that is expected. So that's something that we are trying to understand how to solve. So just wanted to put it out there because maybe you have some ideas on how to do it.
Just to comment on that, is everyone aware of the Africa Education Fellows Program that Rick Hanishek has set up? So just selected a second cohort of really high-performing African researchers. So the more this program can link up and benefit from that capacity, be great.
Okay. Hi,
We're hoping that today and this morning and indeed the board this afternoon is all about, all of you helping make sure that we're representing the voices of everybody here in the right way, visualizing it in the right way. I'm looking at Asia because from the very, very outset, Gates has been just such a fundamental partner in helping us do some of that strategic thinking and often commissioning really great consultants to, your McKinsey types who are beautiful at doing these kind of visualizations or something. So maybe we need a McKinsey on this one. But this is just my very crude attempt to represent what this might mean at the country level. And what does it mean for us all working together? So this is a work in progress and needs your input in and maybe a bit of the Gates magic to make it look good. But a little bit like Barbara began at the beginning, in education, there are so many players. And, how many years ago was it you started the Fast Track Initiative?
2001.
Okay, so in 2001, there was an attempt for all of the donors and players to coordinate behind a government lead for where we would put our investments. And our vision and the vision that Asia and I and at the time that our bank colleagues and our UN colleagues had was that we might try and create that same coordination around research behind a government lead, behind the needs of government around the research that we would then do, and strengthen their capability to also both demand it and produce it. So how do we represent that? At the bottom, we have at the moment all of the kind of players, the donors who engage with government. And at the moment, they're doing that in fragmented ways, and we're all going with our own little projects, and we're getting our little signed letters to say that we're partnering with them. And there's a long line of us outside the minister's office waiting to get our little MOUs signed that we're all coordinating to do the best research and that our research makes a difference. And then we go back and say that our research findings are the most robust ones, and therefore they should change their funding aligned with our idea. What we're hoping is that we can go with one voice on these and have research represented together as one voice. On the other side, we're producing things like
synthesis, best buys. In the research community, we've got the global academics, experts, we've got in-country think tanks. We benefited from hearing from a lot of those in the last couple of days, some absolutely brilliant think tanks. And we have the local researchers that we just heard from Lucy about. And again, a lot of that is not coordinated in that sense. When we went to India, and British Council, can't see British Council, where's I mean, Gary in particular, you were instrumental in helping us bring people together for the first time and for a long time. And they said, we have not had a joint review mission for years and years, and we never come together to talk about our research. And I said, why not? And they said, well, we're in competition with each other. You know, we're all competing for the funds. So we don't we know we should come together, but there's no one to bring us together. And they said a sincere thank you to the British Council for providing that safe space of convening. So then on the other side, of course, we have the government themselves who, within their own ecosystem, don't necessarily draw on their own data. We know ministries of education aren't necessarily having the conversations needed, the difficult ones with ministries of finance around, well, actually, if we are going to scale this TAL programme, what's that going to cost? And are you going to fund it? I mean, one of the big questions in all of this scale is, where's the money going to come from? So how are those partners linking up as well? How are we in the evidence labs? And one of the things that's really exciting about the conversations that Donica has been hosting over the last 18 months on Ed Labs is getting everyone to really think, how do we support the governments themselves to use their own data, have dashboards that work, and bring that together in a useful way for decision making. So how do we bring these, the ecosystem of the evidence production together? How do we bring that communication of that evidence together more strongly? How do we use local education groups where they exist? And how do we have champions from the research side represented in that local education group? Because often there isn't a research represented. And how do we then ensure that what's being produced by those local academics actually is responding to what the government needs? Because I can say from what I've seen, I taught in Kenyatta more than 20 years ago, and most of the academic research still, when I go back each year to do a continued training that I do every year for them, they are still producing research that isn't demanded by their very own country or answering the questions that their government need. It's still about what their professor has a link with their community or where they came from in their village or the question that they think they have access to. And that's the research that sits in that library that I told you about. The ministry was so proud of. It's those master's theses that no one else has read and no one else will ever read. And they're not getting access to that global evidence and it's not in their hands. So how do we address that demand and supply mission? So that's a visual as best as I could represent it. But please, how do we improve it? Does this capture everything? What have we missed? And where should we be focused?
Great, thanks Rachel, thanks Stefan. Hi everyone, I'm Selina from SDA. So yeah, this is a kind of a question for Stefan, actually, given you're one of our leading experts on kind of political economy. And I know lots of your political economy work is focused on political economy reform within governments themselves, but I know you're also interested in the political economy of like institutions. And obviously we've got a lot of different institutions in the room. We've got this vision of trying to improve coordination structures at the country level, but as Rachel said, there's a lot of existing structures at the country level, some of which are demanded from the global architecture, like the Global Partnership for Education, informs a lot of the architecture at the country level. There's some challenges with that. Then we've got lots of global structures that we're setting up a new one with the hub essentially, but then there's other ones that exist and will continue to exist. And yeah, I guess just really interested in your reflections on how the political economy of all of these different organizations working together, what some of the pitfalls could be and how we can make sure that we really do kind of coordinate in this way that is hopefully more simple at the country level where we need the evidence uptake to happen.
Right, first of all, thank you. And thank you for preparing me for this. Look, this is going to be a very complete answer, and there's many people in the room that will also have their own answer. Let me say it in two directions. It's on the one hand, it's the obvious thing that in a way what we're doing here. Okay, so the way I like to think about this is that that you need to have clarity about, as all these organizations, can we create clarity about what is our own underlying objective function? Because if different organizations have different objectives, and of course, you know, if you come from a World Bank or a bilateral or foundation, you have people behind it, boards or whatever, that may push you in certain directions. And I think it's always so crucially important that there is an attempt made to actually have, okay, what are the things that we actually jointly agree on? Because there's no way to get coordinated action unless what you actually want to achieve is broadly coordinated. That doesn't mean you have to agree on everything. It's a bit like politics, you know, in a sense, you're all diverse parties in the whole game. It's about, you know, finding a dominant coalition amongst all the key partners that you're strong enough to actually drive things through. So it's there. Because that's the same in a country as well, is that, you know, if you want to change, you can never just say, you know, oh, it's just as long as we have the Minister of Education outside, we can do reform. We know that that's not the case. You know, if you don't have a way of bringing in different levels and understand the bureaucratic incentives or the teachers' incentives or the teacher unions' incentives, you can't do change. It's actually the same with us. I mean, and I'm glad you asked that, because one of my, when I was chief economist in DFID, I was so amused always that we had a bunch of political scientists, governance advisors in our organization that were brilliant on the political economy of the country and had no understanding of Whitehall and where our ministers came from. And that's the other part, you know, understand your own boards, you know, what they actually want, because you can then otherwise really waste your time, because at some point you can't do it. So that's maybe the one side. There's another side where I will now say something that's totally seemed to be off field relative to what we're talking about. Personally, I'm deeply concerned that in most environments related to development, we still think we're roughly in 2014. Put it differently, when geopolitics was not totally undermining what we're doing, where electorates in our own countries were totally turning against aid in all kinds of ways, and we're actually thinking we can do business as usual. So the minimal amount, and that's definitely for the ones that working in some of these organizations, realize that that we live in different times. And actually, it makes a difference because, you know, famously, was it Harold Wilson who famously said, well, before my time, we never had it so good in the 1960s. You know, as development, we never had it so good until about 5 years ago. And it's a far more difficult time to actually do some of the things. So we should just be aware that there's a rising constraint in our authorizing environment of what we can do. I think this community is probably still well placed. We can reflect it, but I do worry about it, what it sometimes can mean on the ground. That, you know, we happily making coalitions with rather support education ministries that are actually not very good, because it actually suits a vote in the Security Council. And so on. So anyway, that's another part of the political economy. But that first point is hopefully more constructive.
Judith, please. Can I ask a question? It was Harold Macmillan, by the way. In the 50s. Never been so good.
Harold Macmillan?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
But similar name.
You've not still repeated.
You know,
Loads of people have said it since.
but I'm trying to get the evidence right. Be correct. That's the way we want to.
She said, oh, rely on Judith.
No. For goodness sake,
It's
no.
Harold.
My question about the hub, and I should know this, so feel free to come back on me on this one. But in terms of, what do we know about the scale of the global footprint? Because I've been thinking about, you know, what we're talking about, the supply and demand equation, and working with different governments from different levels of openness and receptivity to evidence, data, research. And we've heard a lot about the same countries this week. I mean, we're all sit if I can say that in FCDO, if somebody says we're going to do 5 pilots, I'd lay money on being able to name at least 4 of those, because we do go back to the same places where we have good partnerships, we've got
good capacity, we've got good evidence, and so we expect to be able to build better in those countries. Are we mapping where we're working? Are we mapping where we're planning to work, where we're encouraging locally led, on ESSA, researchers? Are we inadvertently leaving gaps, or have we already nailed this?
Yeah, why don't we take a few more questions? We have Noam and Aisha as well, and then we have 4 hands. Why don't we take these? Noam start, and then we'll come here, and then.
I was actually going to start a conversation with Judith, so I hope that's okay. Just to respond to that, actually, so it's not a question. So we actually the BSG consortium is 40 plus organizations. 2/3 of them are based in low and middle income countries. A lot of them were here at the conference. They're not here in the room today. Maybe they should be next time, but they were in the conference. And so the vast majority of work is happening through that consortium, through those partnerships. 11 countries, 4 focus countries, 7 project countries. So happy to name that, but I think it's a really important reminder that's where a lot of the direct activity is happening, in addition to the partnerships through the hub here. Now, actually, a lot of the work through the strategic partners has now intersected very nicely with the BSG consortium, actually. So, for example, the consortium is working in Ghana, so is the bank, and so forth. Similarly, the consortium is working in Pakistan. IEP's work is in Pakistan, so there's a nice synergy. But yeah, just to say, very important, and we're prioritizing that, and we've tried to not necessarily just pick the usual suspects, actually, and so it's a great challenge. And so, for example, even though South Africa is not an FCDO priority country, there's such an exciting EdLab activity happening there, with government itself commissioning evidence embedded in the system, that we thought it was really important that it was part of the hub. And our aspiration is kind of bit by bit to keep expanding over time. Yes. So if you have countries you think we should prioritize, would love to have that debate, maybe settings that aren't the usual suspect. And so that is the aspiration.
Just 2 things on that. I mean, I'm certainly not looking for you to only work in where I'm interested in CDO. We are interested in priority countries, but also that what's the plan for expansion? Yes, forgive me, I should have said unclear of where we're working at the moment in the partners. It's, do we have a framework for looking forward and thinking about where evidence-based research are not being provided, and therefore would the hub in the future have the ability to turn its
So one gap, for example, we're not working in very fragile settings, and that's a gap, and that might be something we want to consider in the future.
How shall I do this? There were people that came before, or do I'm actually going to go back to the people that came earlier, and then maybe we can take Aisha and then Louis then.
Thank you for mentioning the global politics and the environment we work in. I think that has a personal impact and it has a professional impact, but it still means that the work is important. It's just the environment we're working in. And sometimes I worry that the global education sector is too general, and so that your focus on the objective was really important. But if the objective is to improve learning outcomes, there is an approach that also needs unifying on. And I fear that sometimes we're not even applying common sense to that approach. So how would you propose that there is more broader consensus building on approach to make sure that the evidence is informing the refinement of that approach to have it?
I'm not going to try to answer it, but it's a really good question to table, and some of us later on can take this forward. Should I come to you or should I go to Louis? I go to Louis now. Louis?
Just a reaction to the graph. I thought it was really comprehensive. But perhaps if we want to move from evidence to policy, an important angle is how to create demand for evidence, and also how to use evidence as a force to shape public opinion, and their communication, to pick up with Asia was saying earlier, is critical. And so how do we engage with media, with journalists, to sort of bring evidence to bear and help push change that way. We used to run under the Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund a series of workshops for journalists on how to sort of translate jargony academic language into sort of information sort of tidbits, and then we tracked in those markets where the journalists were active, how they were reporting on education evidence, and again, it was significant. So again, I think that this is a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. And just a slight nuance to add to it is just, there is quite a lot of heterogeneity of how demand is generated in different places. Sometimes it's through journalists, and if we go in Latin America, it will be quite different than in many African countries, how it's generated. So it needs quite a lot of thinking about where does demand come from. So it's a great thing. I'm now going to go back to Rebecca, because you were there, and then,
I just wanted to pick this thread back up. I mean, you would say, how many countries do we have education programs in? 60. So we have a pretty good global footprint. And as the global center, this is like a global center of education is a global entity. So we cannot, we have to have a strategy for how we are going to decide to, through the code, work in any particular country. So what I'm trying to say is, if the What Works Hub has a strategy for expansion, like whether it's a conflict and crisis context or whatever it might be, that is a really great place for us to sit down together and coordinate and see how we can benefit from each other's work.
And you haven't picked your countries.
We have not. No.
That's great.
Yeah.
great coalition building going on there.
Yeah.
Excellent. Tom.
I just have something that's completely linked to that, going back to your question, Judy. I mean, part of the work that we do also is we are working in countries around the world and doing research in a lot of these countries, including countries that are in crisis and conflict in Afghanistan and Sudan and places like this, right? And so one of the hopes I think that we have for the hub is that we can take a lot of the methods, a lot of the lessons that we're learning from like kind of the more intensive work that you're doing in some of these countries, and filter these to the other countries that we're working with around the world at UNICEF, right? And so part of the way that we're going to be doing that is through this regional capacity that we're hiring within 3 of our different regions that can directly support country offices when they're working with governments to say like, hey, government, you're doing this education program. How about you use this evidence, or how about we build this research into this program that you're doing? So I think it's built into the hub and the strategic partnerships we're trying to do through partners, maybe not directly through the hub itself, trying to filter out some of these lessons to the broader, like not just the usual suspects of countries, because there's big demand from a bunch of countries, not just the ones we normally work with.
It's great. Tonica.
Yeah, so mine is more a question, comment, and maybe this is for the board later today, is I think when you listen to the 3-minute pitches, it still does feel that we're trying to align ourselves to a broad framework, but we're still doing our things, right? And the question for us is, are we happy with that? Is that kind of the thing that we want to continue with, which is 40 or plus, I don't know what the total number is at 40, right? Organizations broadly aligned around some common framework? Or are we looking to pick, these are the 3 or 4 things to your point, Azim, that where we're going to codify our approach and actually intentionally invest in joint things to see change happen. Because we do have powerful incentives outside of this room, our boards, our decision-making mechanisms. We could say, we want to do these things, but at the end of the day, we have budgets to approve, boards to report back to. Decisions are not made in a vacuum. So I think that we need to probably go back to that of, are there certain levers where we want to invest in together? And then everything else is a nice to have. Otherwise, it's still worried we're going to end up with a just slightly better organized patchwork, but it'd still be a patchwork of things. That's not to put a damper on any of these conversations, but let's just be a little bit honest with ourselves of, are we trying to make something that's fragmented a little bit prettier, or are we trying to make something actually better organized? And that's the challenge with this group. That's what we're here.
It's great. I'm just looking around in the edge. Okay, you want to?
Thank you. No, I like the chart. I think it nicely identified the actors on the ecosystem. What I was missing a little bit was what the first remark, the first person referred to, which is the governance of that. There were 2 arrows, demand and supply. There were some actors there and some bubbles, but it was not clear to me how this structure is going to identify what are the priorities and prioritize them at the country level in a way that are relevant to the context and owned by the context. So yeah, so I was, and how we balance that global agenda with that local agenda, which for example, Donica was mentioning the other day as well. So maybe making that a little bit more explicit in the graph, what is that mechanism could also help.
Great, that's a great comment. I think one more comment or question, yeah?
Thank you very much. I think it's good to discuss how we engage government in terms of the developing the monitoring and the evaluation of each of the projects, and from the beginning, because that will ensure that the project will generate type of evidence they need, ownership, and also address some kind of a imbalanced relationship between government and us. When we say, oh, we work with the government, it means many different degrees of engagement. But must be, I think it's quite important to have governments and maybe the researchers from the local universities and local communities jointly develop the evaluation plan so that we generate evidence. At the same time, we support the development of researchers and ensure the result will be owned by the government for the better reform agenda.
This is great. I think Noam wants to come in.
Yeah, just a comment picking up on what Donica was saying. I do wonder if there could be a common project that the group tries. Maybe that's too ambitious, so I'm seeing some, I don't know if I'm seeing nodding or nerves, but maybe that's measurement, kind of a measurement of the cost. I know that's high on the agenda, measurement of implementation. But that's something we've also tried to do with the consortium is, there's also people have their comparative advantages and their focus areas. So it's kind of a common theme, a common framework, and then a common project, which is measurement. So I wonder if there is kind of a similar possibility among the strategic partners. Maybe there's another idea, but it would be nice to have a common thread that's a theme, but maybe also something very specific and tangible.
That's great. I think we're going to wrap up now, and maybe on that last point, if we clearly a common agenda and common more concrete than just lofty objectives, as you were saying as well, is quite important. I think we should not be naive. We're not going to walk out of this room as if we suddenly throw away all the objectives, functions all the objectives that we have ourselves and doing it. But actually, I think power comes from a strong coalition. And the clearer the shared objective and activities are, the more influence collectively you can have. So I think it's actually, if we say the ambition of the next 5 years is actually to say, how do we collectively become more powerful and influential? And that actually is to do with both common objectives, common agendas. But it's not going to be overnight, but it actually is something generally to keep in mind. And I think that's clearly a great ambition for our hub as well, to be part of that fostering, and we know coalition building always involves some compromises here and there. And we just need to be willing to do that. And that's probably what we can do. And I think that's food for thought over your cup of tea and your hopefully piece of cake. I don't know what's that. But anyway, and it's good. That's it.
Thank you to everybody.